Hello, how you doing? Asked a question an awful lot after making a video a couple weeks ago about how to do undoing. Yeah, moved my fireplace there, almost caught myself on fire. I said that it was neither doing nor undoing. That sounds like an enigma. It's not. Undoing or apophaticism is actually hyperlogical and certainly so rational. The goal, of course, lies beyond logical thought, certainly lies beyond good and evil, beyond consciousness. In English, unfortunately, there's an issue with mind, brain, and consciousness essentially meaning the same thing. That's not the case in Greek or Pali or Sanskrit. And the reason for that is consciousness has a beginning in time and end in time. It's consubstantial with matter and spirit. Kind of like white light through a red filter, you have red light, right? Well, that red light is the combination of the red filter and, of course, the white light. It has a beginning in time and an end in time. By definition, logically and rationally, is phenomena. The idea of purifying something that has any sort of temporal footprint is irrational and certainly so illogical. So this idea of pure consciousness is illogical. People say, well, these are just words, and that certainly is true, but to speak precisely is to speak accurately so that, there's not a confusion between people. This is the reason why I don't use one of about a half dozen different words, like meditation, which has absolutely no definition whatsoever. I mean, that's not my opinion. That's certainly so a fact. It's beyond all contraries. So it's certainly not doing. It's certainly not non-doing. The undue modulation to undue modulation by existential doing, i.e. actions, which is kamma. That's Pali. Sanskrit is the word everybody's familiar with, which is karma, is of course a self-modulation. It's like someone trying to think their way out of a thinking box. It's irrational and certainly so illogical. Not doing is, of course, catapraxis or catalepsy, which is what the Zen folks do. Most of them. Someone's, of course, going to attack me for saying that, but that is the case. By and large, that is the case. Not to do is, of course, just to go with the flow, not making oneself not to engage in self-proximity. And of course, self-proximity, I'm not referring to the self you see in the mirror. Once again, it has to be said over and over again that there's two selves in all forms of monistic metaphysics, both Greek, Indian, and Egyptian: existential and temporal self, and transcendent self. Obviously and logically so. Immanent self is like the red light through the red filter. It has a beginning in time, it has an end in time. The notion of purifying that is absolutely irrational, ridiculous, and just flat out insane, of course. We have to ask ourselves, we'll work our way back since it has to be rational and logical. If gold is scattered due to, and of course it gets embedded in host rock, powdered gold, which is most gold on Earth is powdered gold, baby powder gold. They call it, not huge nuggets, which are quite anomalous. Gold gets broken down really easy by Mother Nature, and it gets scattered. And a lot of ore processing places, they're not digging up veins of gold. I mean, they will find, gold veins, but they calculated on how many ounces per ton of rock, and to harvest a ton of rock requires X amount of wear and tear on the bulldozers and the rock collectors, and also to the chemicals and the diesel required to actually harvest that. So it's scattered. So using that analogy, if the mind or spirit is scattered, because gold is gold is gold, spirit is spirit is spirit. The idea of purification of something that is fundamentally pure confuses the absolute living hell out of people. It's like, why would I want to purify something that is fundamentally pure? Well, water is water, but why aren't you drinking out of your toilet like your dog loves to do? Dogs apparently love to drink out of the toilet. I wouldn't know, I don't have a dog. Well, because within that is particulates, matters of poo and, all sorts of things. That's the reason why you wouldn't want to drink out of the toilet. However, the water that actually feeds your toilet is the same water, that feeds your tap, but obviously we know the distinction there. But since it's scattered due to modulation, how is this scattering and how can the scattering, of course, be undone? To say disobjectification, i.e. apophaticism, i.e. via negativa, i.e. neti, is no different than saying an unscattering. I tell people, like, what's the methodology? So what's the opposite of dilution? Well, that would be concentration. Yeah, you concentrate gold. Nobody has ever purified gold in any planet on any galaxy. No human beings ever purified gold, but of course we say purified gold. By purifying gold, we mean that we're unscattering it, undiluting it amongst, because like American bullion actually has, I forget what the percentage is, same is true of, I forget a few other bullion. It's mixed with silver. You know, 1 ounce gold American Eagle is a bit over an ounce, for example. It has silver in it so that it's not so darn soft, because gold is really soft. But you net an ounce of gold. That's why the thing is over an ounce. But nobody's purified gold. What they've done is unscattered it. To reject that which one is scattered amongst is an undoing. Retroduction, apophaticism, synthesis via negativa, neti, these are all different silly little words. They're not really silly, but silly words to refer to an undoing. The undoing, of course, has to be willed, and it must necessitatively, there's that fascinating word, necessitatively be willed by something that's antecedent. Say that, light itself is sentient, yeah, which it's not. I'm just using an analogy here. Of course, the body would be analogous to the filter, and the red light would be analogous to consciousness. It has beginning in time and end in time. You can't purify it because the red light can't be made pure. The purity, of course, would be the white light, because that has beginning in time and end in time. There's no purification of it. But the red light, if it were sentient, which of course it's not, be made antecedent to the filter and recognize itself as that which it truly is. Remove out the frequency filtration that makes up consciousness. By the way, the ancient Pali word for consciousness, or vijnana, it literally means agnosis, vi plus, and this is Romanized Pali, vi plus jnana or gnosis, or the inverse of gnosis. Gnosis, of course, is wisdom, and wisdom is just self-proximity. So the ancient Pali word for consciousness is hyper-accurate. It literally means the scattering of jnana or gnosis, or the white light. And this, of course, means that the white light is directed away from itself. Light, by definition, its extrinsic attribute, as I recall, is illumination. And this is really important, and this is the fundamental basis behind the understanding of monism, M-O-N-I-S-M, if you want to look that up. Pythagoreanism, Platonism, Advaita Vedanta, original Buddhism, and I emphasize original Buddhism, are all monism. They are the complete and absolute inverse of creationism and nihilism slash atomism slash atheism, all of which are the exact same thing. True atheism, by the way, is called metaphysical atheism. So one essence and two natures. One essence and two natures, of course, is getting into discussing monism, which I'm not interested in doing here. This is no different than light and illumination, principle and attribute, which are not two things, but which are one thing. Nobody can understand the hardcore metaphysics behind Pythagoreanism, original Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, Sri Sankaracharya. And by the way, he didn't come up with Advaita Vedanta. And Buddhism, so-called, that term Buddhism didn't even exist until the 16th century. It was nothing other than a Neo-Sramanic movement of monistic monism, i.e. Neo-Sramanic monism, of like their principal Upanishads and even the Vedas. The Vedas, of course, are far too ritualistic. So this idea of liberation, which is paraphrased in two passages of two totally different works, one Sanskrit, one Pali, Bhava Nirodha Bandham, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Liberation, which is the goal of yoga, is the subjugation of Nirodha, mental perturbations, nous perturbations. Perturbation, of course, no different than frequency or modulation. By modulation, something is able to be captured and synthesized with something else. That's why the secret in the entire universe behind life is this neat little antenna right here. It's upside down. This is a 108, 36, 36-degree triangle, the only perfect incommensurable geometry in the entire universe. It is the dipole antenna for the manifestation of life. It is literally that red filter which makes life possible, like life analogous to the red filter analogy. The red light would be life. Spirit would, of course, be the white light. The body, the gross heap of matter and carbon, flesh and blood, yada yada, of course, is the filter. And the byproduct of both of those is that red light. Of course, that which makes the two possible, in the case of matter and spirit, taking the analogy a little further, of course, is water. This is what said in the Timaeus, the third thing which makes life possible. Timaeus, by the way, predates Plato. Or bhav nirodha nibbana, literally nirvana, which is nivriti, which the word nibbana is Pali, nirvana is Sanskrit, both the exact same word, means nivriti, which means the subjugation of disturbance or modulation. Bhava nirodha nibbana, the subjugation of becoming. Nirodha, subjugation of, becoming, bhava. Bhava is no different than saying vritti. Perturbation, becoming is perturbation is becoming. All of this is both hyper-rational, hyper-logical, and irreducibly simple. Most of the people that read metaphysics, like, I don't have 10 lifetimes to figure this garbage out. I'd like to, but, all this stuff is a bunch of blah, 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 which is what people think what I'm doing is that right now. But I can put into 20 minutes what takes people 20, 30, 40 years. I'm not bragging, I'm being truthful. To come to they say, what's it all boiled down to? What? And it's all boiled down to absolute simplicity. Modulation is the extrinsic attribute, that which you are by principle, unfortunately, is that which you are by nature. Light and illumination, the removal of the extrinsic attribute, which causes dilution as identification with that which you are not. That's the reason why the most repeated Pali phrase is Isakaya Namisata, which means the body is not the soul. Rupa nata, Veda nata, Sankara nata, Vinya nata, Nama rupa anatiti. Ancient dead language. Here I'm speaking an ancient dead language, been dead for over 2,000 years. Why am I speaking it? Sometimes I have dreams in ancient Pali. That's always kind of strange. But this scattering is incredibly simple. It didn't take, any sort of genius with a PhD. None of these people that understood what this stuff was fundamentally back then had any sort of formal degree. Most of them didn't. Most of them were illiterate. You only had to have a fundamental grasp of why is there suffering? Why do I identify with that which is not myself? What is the reason for this? How do I reverse it? How do I make unbecome that which is become? There's no pure cleansing a turd, no polishing a turd. There's no such thing as purifying a psychophysical persona non grata, Bob Suleri, that has a beginning in time, must necessitatively have an end in time. So one essence, two natures. The second nature, of course, is the reason for embodiment, but it is not a sin or a first cause, which is the fundamental great fallacy of all forms of creationism. Rather, the uncaused cause or extrinsic attribute or the secondary nature of the divine. One nature, of course, posterior to essence, is the logos of the divine. In the case of light and illumination, of course, it's illumination. Self-nodding, a long line of selves, getting to the methodology of how to make this unbecome, or how to undo it. Self-nodding, i.e., referring to the psychophysical self. This is not that which I truly am, not my beliefs, feelings, views, so on and so on. Ignorance is our modulation and identity. Beliefs are modulation, desires, very identity itself. I'm Bob, I'm Sue, I'm so-and-so, I'm that thing in the mirror. My identity is my credit score and my bank balance and all this other garbage, which of course is not that which we truly are. So self-nodding in a long line of selves that are mere beliefs that are, of course, antithetical to the actual goal. All remains, of course, after reaching the goal must be afterwards merely a mere pointer to the goal, and of course not the goal itself. People have these mystical experiences and they think that's the goal, and of course it's not. Afterwards, we realize that these are mere pointers to the goal, absolutely not the goal. So we are not ignorance. These are modulations. We think we are our views, our beliefs, our desires, our identities, and of course all of those are a giant lead anchor around our spiritual self that drags us to the bottom of a bottomless pit of suffering, unfortunately. In evolution and metaphysics, I grew up debating these topics, and literally. And people think, well, that's old stuff, like it's expired milk, you know. It's expired, that's old stuff, we need to start with something new, you know. And evolution and metaphysics is completely impossible. Nor is true logical, rational metaphysics ever old. Rather, always is, and forever shall be so, universal, current, and absolutely relevant. One does not privately hold to opinions about the sum of 2 plus 2, or 1 plus 1. Someone or anyone is not allowed to think as they like or think for oneself regarding metaphysics. This, of course, where everybody gets bogged down because we think we're our beliefs. Well, I don't agree with that, and I do meditation. It makes me feel better. There's a lot of things you could do to feel better. You could be put in a hospital, be put on a drip of some of the good stuff, and watch the Cartoon Network, and you'll never stress another day for the rest of your life, however long that may be. So that is not the goal. Liberation has nothing to do with leading a happier, healthier life. You know, there is no mention in any text, but either Greek, Indian, or Egyptian, ever, anywhere, in any translation, a mention to an end of physical suffering. Like, I'm not tired of suffering. So what? There's, for the born, that which has a beginning in time, we must suffer, get old, and die. So there's no teaching of that. That has nothing to do with illumination, transcendence, or being the dead man walking. It's just absolutely impossible. People say that numbers or math doesn't lie, but of course neither do numbers tell the truth. Numbers say, here is what is, but this is neither truth nor is it the lie. Numbers, like symbols, of course, are merely supports for contemplation. Symbolism bridges, in the case of metaphysics, we use symbolism, bridges the sacred and the profane, which is why meaningless art is both idolatry and actually fetishism. Aristotle said the soul never thinks without a mental image, and it is the case that even to think speculatively, and think about this, this is true, that even to think speculatively, one must have a mental image or picture. The state of comprehension without images and without symbols is, of course, the final stage of yoga, i.e. samadhi, which means synthesis. Synthesis, of course, means absolute transcendence. This is the dead man walking. You have a living person, and it might look like they're going around, you know, eating and pooing and, you know, buying groceries like everybody else. Like, oh, how could that be a transcendent person? They're not levitating off the ground. That person has died to that which is in the mirror and that which you think that they are. Flesh and blood, Bob, Sue, Larry, so on and so forth. You know, that is not who you see there. This is the ancient meaning of the term akim kana, a non-person. A spiritual appellation for someone who's died to the psychophysical or terrestrial and has complete identification with the transcendent self and therein abides, such that when death occurs, which is the breakup between matter and spirit, you know, there is no ill, there's nothing to have sorrow for, because, you know, what happened must necessitatively pass, and that was never the person ultimately anyway. This is the ancient Pali word, and also to Sanskrit, Mahapurisha, which means supreme person, which is a reference, of course, to the transcendent person, as opposed to the psychophysical person, which is Namiso Ata, literally the most repeated phrase in ancient Pali. Not the soul. You can't say my soul, because my implies possession. You know, my soul implies you. Your soul is owned by something else, and, you know, you're talking about two selves again. My soul. It's like, you have a soul? Yes, I have a soul. Okay, you as another individual have a soul, which is that which you truly are. You know, just a completely irrational talk, but of course everybody thinks like this. The question then becomes, obviously, once again, how can it be undone? Think of the case of the radio transmitter, right? Radio transmitter is sending out a signal. It operates on, say, 88.9 megahertz. You're listening to 88.9. How do you unmodulate it? Wouldn't you like cut the power to the whole thing? Well, that's death. No, that's the end of transmigration. The end of life after life after life. I mean, you cut the power to the whole radio station, you're not consuming any power. You have no modulation. And when you have no modulation, you have no embodiment. Crude analogy of embodiment would be, of course,
under partly sunny skies.
is this signal at 162.400 megahertz embodied here? There's no soul in the body, and there's also no signal inside this radio. Let's think about that for a second. Yeah, that doesn't mean that there's no soul, and it certainly doesn't mean that there's no radio signal. But once modulated, it is tunable. By the way, the water analogy of what the water would be in the radio analogy is this, the antenna, that which makes life possible. It is that third thing. We have the signal, we have the body, which would be analogous to the radio, and the battery. Like you recharge your battery, the human battery, you eat food, that's the human battery. This, of course, you got to recharge it, the lithium battery. The third thing, which makes life possible with the consubstantiality between matter and spirit, is this neat little thing, the antenna. In the case of life, that antenna is literally water. And water has this interesting geometry, which, by the way, this particular geometry, which is upside down, makes the Pythagorean pentagram. The 108, 36, 36 degree triangle in triplicate overlaid over top of each other is the Pythagorean pentagram. Really the most important secret in the entire universe. And that discovery, wait for it, is mine. That's this discovery in 509D to 511 of Plato's Republic, the divided line section, all of which make up phi, 1, 1, 1 over phi, which is the incommensurate geometry of the Pythagorean triangle. Also 2 of water, which makes life possible. I'm sure that's purely coincidental. So getting back to the radio station, if you will, let's cut the power. Let's take an axe to the power line that feeds it. If you do that, there's no modulation from the antenna. There's no more consumption of power, which would be the true definition of energy. Energy, most people's heads is upside down and backwards. They think energy is the power at, say, 1,000 watts from the radio broadcast tower, 1,500 feet up off the ground. No, that's the dissipation of energy, because it has to perpetually feed power to spread that modulated signal in the airwaves. It's literally not airwaves, of course, an ether perturbation modality, light. Radio, of course, is just an invisible form of light, just as gamma, so on and so forth. So, how then, this is part 1, I will continue, how then, and how, why, and by what means do you cut the power to the radio station, which is broadcasting the signals? You have no modulation, you have no signal, no embodiment, and no dissipation of energy. I'm pretty sure that the power bill on a radio station that cuts its power is going to be 0. Every month the bill will be 0. There's no consumption of power. Wouldn't that be right? Pretty sure that's right, isn't it? Yes. True metaphysics is hyper-rational, hyper-logical. It is not a religious belief system, which requires suspension of credulousness. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Well, you don't have to understand it, you just need to believe it. As someone's thumping a book. Thump it, well, you don't have to understand it, you just need to believe it. Oh, sure. Yeah, most of the world believes in that stuff. Fine by me, don't care. I'm more interested in what's logical, rational, accurate, and wise. So, let's continue on with how to undo what has been done, because it can be undone. If you ever want to contact me, my information in the description below. Any donations always warmly welcome. I hope you have a lovely weekend. Lux Veritas.